Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Winter and Spring YA Announcements. I'm Sarah Hunter, editor of the Books for You section at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Links to today's slides were included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the link located there. You can also download the slides at any time by copying the URL on this screen into your web browser. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Beth Eller, Senior Director of School and Library Marketing at Bloomsbury, Anthony Parisi, Associate Director of School and Library Marketing at Torteen, Brigid Kemmerer, whose book Avel, So Bold and Deadly will publish January 26, 2021, and Charlie Jane Anders, whose book Victories Greater than Death will publish April 13, 2021. First, we'll hear from Beth Eller. Beth is the Senior Director of School and Library Marketing at Bloomsbury Children's Books. Welcome, Beth. The floor is yours.
Hi, this is Beth. I'm thrilled to be here today. I have some of our upcoming winter titles and some spring titles. I'm going to go through our list pretty quickly because I'm so thrilled today. We have two authors joining us who are going to have a conversation about their upcoming titles, and I want to hear that, so I'm going to go quickly. Next slide. So these are some that are available now. Next slide. This is a book that I really hope that everyone knows about, but if you haven't, it's a book you shouldn't miss. It's popping up on year-end best list. It's received multiple starred reviews. It's both a heartwarming, a heart-wrenching, and inspiring memoir. In 1992, 16-year-old Amra's life changed when Serbian troops invaded her Bosnian town and she was forced to flee. It's her story and her journey of leaving Bosnia and coming to America. It also places her story within the larger conversation about how ethnic and religiously diverse societies can struggle under the threat of bigotry and extremism. It's a powerful novel. The cat, who was never named, is this cat that sort of finds her family and becomes this good luck talisman through the struggle to escape. It's absolutely stunning. I hope you read it. I hope we hear more about it in January. Next slide. This is Never Look Back by Lillian Rivera. This is a book, it's a detailed reimagining of the Orpheus and Eurydice myth. It mixes contemporary realism and fantasy. It may start with Greek myth, but then it also brings in a lot of elements of Caribbean mythology. But it also, as a person who has to confess that I had to Google the original myth because I didn't remember the details, I actually love this book without knowing much about the myth. Because it also deals with issues of identity and trauma. Yuri, the main character, has come to the Bronx from Puerto Rico and is suffering from post-traumatic stress after Hurricane Maria. And her family is also struggling to help her deal with her anxiety. So it's a story that blends mythology, magical realism, and also it's a very realistic teen love story. It's an absolutely fun read. Next. And now coming in winter 2021. This is an author that needs no introduction. It's Renee Watson. She certainly needs no introduction, but this book is a slight departure for Renee. This is her first foray into YA romance. And Naya, the main character, she attends an open mic night that's sponsored by a youth activist organization that her cousin is very involved with. And she meets the MC Ty, who's very handsome, and she develops a crush on him. She sort of accidentally tells a little lie that leads him to believe that she's more of an activist than she is, and then has to deal with the consequences of that. It's a story that is very empowering. She deals with issues of body positivity. She's a larger size girl. It deals with popular girls who are not mean girls. So it's a fun romance, but it's really about learning to love yourself and those around you. It's absolutely, as Renee, It will appeal to teens, and it will definitely, we'll see more starred reviews, I'm sure. Next. Legacy, another author that needs no introduction. This is Nikki Grimes, also has seen some starred reviews. This is a sort of a follow-up to her last book, her last One Last Word, which was a Boston Globe Horn Book Award winner, and also got, I think, 5-star reviews. In this one, she goes back to the poems of the Harlem Renaissance, but this time she focuses on the women poets. And as she did in the first book, she takes a poem from one of the original Harlem Renaissance poems and does a technique called the golden shovel, which she takes one line of the original poem and makes that each word in that line the last word of her poem. And if it could be said to introduce youthful protagonists or themes to a younger audience, that is exactly what she does. She takes those poems, she reintroduces the themes and the topics to a younger audience. She introduces women poets who are not well known. It's also illustrated by 12 award-winning African-American illustrators, which I think I have a slide here. Can we see next? Oops, no, I don't, sorry. But it's a beautiful gift book. It's a book that gives you so many entry points in. You could read one poem, you could read all the poems. It's, again, an absolutely stellar offering from Nikki Grimes. And now for something very different. In this book, Can't Take That Away, this is a debut from Stephen Salvatore. It's about a genderqueer teen, Carrie Parker, and he's 16. He's tried out for the school play. It's The Wiz, and he gets the part of that's normally played by a girl. It's causes consternation in the school that this boy has this part, or this character who identifies as they has this part. So it's a story very much about identity and queer identity, but at the same time, it's also a high school romance because he meets another young boy who's a guitarist, and he really gets into his first romantic relationship. There's a whole cast of friends. It's very much a serious book about gender and being discriminated against, but at the same time, it's against the backdrop of a really fun high school story about the drama club. Next. And this is As Far As You'll Take Me. This is from Phil Stamper. This is also a book that happens to deal with a gay teen. He's grown up in a small Texas town. He's sort of been outed in a way that wasn't totally voluntary. He feels really his conservative parents, he feels being judged, the people in the town, he feels he's being judged. So he escapes to the UK where he's staying with a cousin. He brings his oboe with him. He gets involved with all these kids at a music school. He meets another boy. He seems to be living this absolutely glamorous fantasy life, but at the same time, he's missing home and he's suffering from anxiety. So at the end of the day, it's really about finding out who your family is and what does family mean. It turns out at the end of this book, he discovers not only does he have this new sort of family he's discovered in the UK, but his own biological family is much more accepting than he ever thought they would be. Next. Every Single Lie. This one is, it's part mystery and it's part character study. Nothing in 16-year-old Beckett's life nobody in her life seems to be telling her the truth. Her boyfriend is hiding texts. Her dad, who just died, had lied about losing his job. And apparently he had a 22-year-old mistress that the family didn't know about. And then Beckett finds a gym bag. It's her boyfriend Jake's gym bag. And in that gym bag, there's the body of a dead baby. And I'm not going to tell you any more than that. But basically, it's a page turner. It's a mystery. It's a character study. It's really a novel that deals with bullying and the power of social media and the impact of telling half truths. It's a page turner in so many different ways. Next. Phoenix Flame is the second book in the Haven Fall series from New York Times bestselling author Sarah Holland. In this book, it was, if you'll remember, there was her uncle's hotel was a portal to the other lands. She is now in charge of the hotel, and she has to stop the people from our world getting into the other portal. It's, again, high fantasy, a lot of fun. Next. I don't feel I need to say a lot about this book. Because Brigid is going to join us later and we'll tell about it ourselves. This is the conclusion of the Cursebreaker series. The two kingdoms are warring. It's told from 4 points of view. I do not want to tell you the end. We use the word stunning a lot to describe books. And in this case, when we say stunning conclusion, we mean it. It's absolutely, you couldn't have a more satisfying end to a trilogy. And I will just tell you this right now, because when everyone emails after this webinar asking for arcs, we do not have an arc from this book, but it will be out soon and you'll get to hear more from Brigid. Next. And this is a sneak peek into spring 21. How We Fall Apart. This is a story from Katie Zhao, whose first novel was a middle grade fantasy. And this one is prep school, based in a prep school. Nancy finds out her friend Jamie has been killed, and suddenly Nancy and her friends are accused of the murder. It's that very insular hotbed world of prep school with a mystery attached. Next. When We Were Stranger, 16-year-old Evie is devastated by her father's death. Her dad, who's died, had left behind a pregnant mistress, and then we have to find out what happens. And I don't want to tell you the end here, but again, it's a page-turning, gripping mystery. Next. Violet Ghost by Leah Thomas. This is a ghost story from Leah. And I have to say that if you've read Leah Thomas, you know her books are absolutely impossible to describe. But this is about a teen who could see ghosts, and then they're all trying to avenge their own deaths. It's, again, it's an undescribable book in a lot of ways, but Leah's books are books that once you start reading them, you cannot put them down. Next. And last, not last, but this is Don't Hate the Player. This is a funny and heartfelt YA romance. It's set against the world of gaming. The main character happens to be a girl of color. She's Black. And a lot of the book is also about what it's like to be a girl in that male-dominated space. She's by day a field hockey star. By night, she's an esports gamer. There is a romance, but it's books that I think this book will be enjoyed by gamers and non-gamers alike. We have in our department a couple of female gamers, and they've all sworn that the gaming parts of this book are incredibly accurate. So I think this will find a big readership. Next. And this book, I have to confess, I have not read one single word of it, but Cinderella is Dead was one of my favorite books from last season, got a lot of great attention. And in this one, I know it's a take on The Secret Garden. There's magic, there's gardens. I know it has a great cover. I've seen it. It is absolutely the book I am most waiting for on this list when it's finished. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Beth. Next, we'll hear from Anthony Parisi. Anthony is the Associate Director of School and Library Marketing at Tor, coordinating library initiatives for both their adult and children's titles. As an avid reader of YA and adult fiction, Anthony is thrilled to share book recommendations with educators and librarians. Take it away, Anthony.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anthony Parisi from Tor Teen, which is the YA imprint of Tor. I'm so pleased to be presenting to you today some of our new and upcoming teen titles that we're really excited about from our winter and summer 2021 seasons. Next slide. First up, we have Each of Us a Desert by award-winning author Marco Shiro. Coming off their Schneider Family Book Award win for their debut novel, Anger is a Gift, Marco Shiro segues into the world of YA fantasy with their latest novel. Set against a magical desert landscape where stories and one's deepest secrets come to life, this is a queer Latinx coming-of-age tale about two young women struggling to find their place in the world while navigating identity, loss, and first love. This is perfect for fans of Adam Silvera and Julia Alvarez. Each of Us a Desert is out now, and Oshiro's debut novel, Anger is a Gift, is currently available in paperback. Next slide. Next up, we have A Neon Darkness by Lauren Shippen. Lauren Shippen's Bright Sessions YA series is based on her acclaimed podcast about the lives of a group of young people coming to terms with their super abilities with help from a mysterious therapist named Dr. Bright. But you don't have to be a listener or fan of the podcast to read or appreciate the books in the Bright Sessions universe, as they're all standalone novels. A Neon Darkness is the second novel from Lauren Shippen and revolves around the question, what if the villain of your story is you? This is a previously untold origin story of supervillain Damien, the bad guy that millions of listeners love to hate and millions of new readers are about to meet. Set in Los Angeles in 2006, longtime Bright Sessions fans and new readers can witness the making of a villain with a dangerous power. When you're around Damien, you want what he wants. Shippen masterfully constructs a thrilling and thoughtful fantasy that explores themes of found family, queerness, power, and consent. A Neon Darkness is out now in hardcover, and the first standalone novel in the series, The Infinite Noise, is available in paperback. Next slide. Eventide. A young woman uncovers unsettling secrets from her family's haunted past in this gothic historical fantasy mystery from debut author Sarah Goodman. Set in a small town in Arkansas in 1907, Eventide feels new yet nostalgic all at once. With Eventide, Goodman takes the cozy domesticity of beloved, heartwarming tales like Little Women and blends it together with the essence and pacing of eerie, atmospheric thrillers penned by authors such as Shirley Jackson and Charlotte Perkins Gilman. When their father descends into madness after the death of their mother, Verity Pruitt and her little sister Lila find themselves on an orphan train to rural Arkansas. In Wheeler, 11-year-old Lila is quickly adopted, but 17-year-old Verity is not. Desperate to stay close to her sister, Verity indentures herself as a farmhand. But even the charming farm boy can't completely distract her from the sense that something is not quite right in this little town. Strange local superstitions abound, especially about the eerie old well at the center of the forest. The woods play tricks, unleashing heavy fog and bone-chilling cold, and sometimes visions of things that aren't there. But for Verity, the most unsettling of all is the revelation that her own parents have a scandalous history to this very town, making it clear that it wasn't coincidental that she and her sister ended up there. Experience the magic, sinister secrets, and madness for yourself because Eventide is available now. Next slide. The Stolen Kingdom. If you love stories filled with dark magic, court intrigue, and forbidden love, look no further than Julian Boehm's upcoming fantasy, The Stolen Kingdom. In this YA standalone, two young heirs play a deadly cat and mouse game and a fight for their kingdom's throne. Fans of Victoria Aveyard and Jennifer Donnelly will absolutely be riveted by The Stolen Kingdom when it releases on March 2nd. Next slide. Victories Greater than Death. Look at this gorgeous cover. This is our major YA debut of winter 2021 by Charlie Jane Anders, the author of the adult novels City in the Middle of the Night and All the Birds in the Sky. And lucky for all of us, Charlie Jane will be joining us in just a little bit to talk all about her foray into the YA space and about this amazing new novel. Tortine is beyond excited to be publishing Charlie Jane's YA series. Victories Greater Than Death is a thrilling sci-fi adventure set against an intergalactic war, perfect for fans of Star Wars, Steven Universe, and Doctor Who. And it's already beloved by countless YA authors such as Holly Black, Veronica Roth, and Amy Kaufman, just to name a few. I'm thrilled to share that Victories is now available for request on NetGalley, so I urge you to check out this perfect YA escapist read before it releases on April 13th. And stay tuned to hear from Charlie herself to talk about her inspiration behind this fun, epic new YA series. Next slide. Chaos on CATNET. Award-winning author Naomi Kritzer thoughtfully explores artificial intelligence, online privacy, and found family in Chaos on CATNET, the follow-up to her sensational near-future YA thriller, Catfishing on CATNET. Catfishing has garnered countless awards and an immense amount of praise from outlets including the New York Times Book Review and NPR. So keep an eye out for Chaos on CATNET coming out on April 27th. Next slide. A Chorus Rises. Bestselling author Bethany C. Morrow returns to the magical universe of A Song Below Water in this highly anticipated follow-up to her captivating debut fantasy. A Chorus Rises is a new tale that follows Naima Bradshaw as she uncovers the true power of a loco magic when faced with the threat of online radicalism against sirens. Morrow's YA debut, A Song Below Water, became an instant national bestseller upon its release this past summer, receiving countless praise from notable YA authors, including Jason Reynolds, who calls the novel both beautiful and brilliant. A Chorus Rises releases next summer on June 1st. Next slide. Witch Shadow. The highly anticipated next installment of Susan Dennard's New York Times bestselling Witchland saga arrives next summer. In Witch Shadow, war has come to the Witchlands, and nothing will be the same again. This action-packed next chapter in the series is told in the point of view of fan favorite Isolde, who must choose on which side of the shadows her destiny will lie. There's no better time for longtime fans and new readers to collect the series, now with bold new covers, as you can see here. So get ready for Witch Shadow coming June 22nd next year. Next slide. The Queen Will Betray You. Author Sarah Henning is back with an enthralling sequel to The Princess Will Save You, a fantasy series perfect for fans of The Princess Bride. In The Queen Will Betray You, Princess Amarande and her irresistible stable boy Luca face insurmountable odds in the fight for their kingdom and their love. See the next chapter to Amarande and Luca's story unfold in The Queen Will Betray You, out on July 6th. Next slide. Faking Reality. My Big Fat Greek Wedding meets Some Kind of Wonderful meets Kara McDowell's Just for Clicks and Sarah Fujimura's Faking Reality, a fun new read with diverse characters, perfect for readers looking for feel-good YA romance. The book follows Dakota McDonald, who swore after the Great Homecoming disaster that she'd never allow her romantic life to be a plotline in her parents' HGTV show again. But when the restaurant run by the family of her best friend and secret crush, Leo, is on the line, Dakota might end up eating her own words. I dare you to read and not feel as if you've been wrapped in a warm hug. Faking Reality comes out on July 13th. Next slide. Flashfire. Our favorite band of queer superheroes are flying onto a shelf near you next July. Flashfire is the explosive sequel to USA Today bestselling author TJ Klune's YA debut, The Extraordinaries, a perfect read for fans of Marissa Meyer and Becky Albertalli. In this next installment, new heroes are arriving in Nova City, and Nick Bell and his friends must figure out who is virtuous and who is villainous. Come for the LGBTQ positive inclusivity, and stay for the hilarious jokes, touching family relationships, neurodiverse representation, and yes, absolutely those super queer superheroes, featuring a vibrant and diverse cast of lovable characters that will spark joy and make you laugh. Don't miss Flashfire, coming July 20th. Next slide. The Sisters of Reckoning. Prepare yourself for queer, badass cowgirl energy and Charlotte Nicole Davis's thrilling conclusion to their Good Luck Girls duology. Set in an alternate Wild West, The Sisters of Reckoning is a fantasy adventure featuring a diverse cast of female outlaws on the run from human and inhuman forces. Along the way, these young and fearless women will forge friendships, overcome tremendous loss, and encounter unexpected love. This incredible series is getting a brand new illustrated look in 2021, making it an exciting time for new readers to dive into this harrowing journey of revenge, freedom, and justice. The Sisters of Reckoning releases on August 10th, and as you wait for the sequel, check out the new paperback edition of The Good Luck Girls, releasing on January 5th. Next slide. The Endless Skies. This is a super exciting new standalone epic fantasy, no doubt to be Shannon Price's breakout new novel about shape-shifting warriors, perfect for fans of Adrienne Young and Wonder Woman. 16-year-old Rowan is about to become one of the famed Leonati warriors, the elite magical fighters who protect the floating city Heliana from the world of men, until disaster strikes the city's children. Against orders from the king, Rowan sets out on her own and tracks down one of the warrior teams, only to find herself face to face with both the man she loves and the one who holds the dark secrets of their past. With time running out and men on their tail, Rowan must risk everything to save her beloved city. Shannon Price's follow-up to her debut, A Thousand Fires, is fast-paced and filled with magic and romance. If you miss watching the big Hollywood blockbusters in the movie theaters, here's your chance for all the sweeping epic fantasy action with The Endless Skies. Next slide. Forestborn. To be born of the forest is a gift and a curse. Forestborn from debut author Elaine Audrey Becker is the launch of a new fantasy series with a timeless feel for fans of Melissa Albert and Emily Duncan. Readers will follow shapeshifter Rora as she sets off on an epic quest through a dangerous forest in hopes of saving her kingdom from a magical illness. Crafted with lyrical prose and gripping twist, Forestborn releases on August 31st. Next slide. And that's it for me. So thank you so much for your time today. Here's how you can connect with us. Follow us on social at Torteen and visit our site to keep updated on all of our new and upcoming YA releases. Feel free to email me about any of the titles I presented today. And thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Anthony. Before we begin the panel portion of today's webinar, we'll hear from Brigid and Charlie Jane about their books. First up is Brigid. Brigid is the author of Letters to the Lost and the Elemental series. She was born in Omaha, Nebraska, though her parents quickly moved her all over the United States, from the desert in Albuquerque, New Mexico, to the lakeside in Cleveland, Ohio, and several stops in between, eventually settling near Annapolis, Maryland. A Vow So Bold and Deadly, the final title in her best-selling Cursebreaker series, publishes next month. Thanks for joining us today, Brigid.
Thank you so much. It is so exciting to be here. I cannot believe how many participants are on this call. I have to apologize. I'm hiding in my basement right now. My kids are unexpectedly doing virtual learning this week. So I am kind of hiding from them. If anyone on this call is a teacher or a parent dealing with virtual learning, you are my hero. But let me talk about my books. So I have written and published more than 10 young adult novels, but the series I'm talking about today is the Cursebreaker series. You might be familiar with A Curse So Dark and Lonely, which was the first book in the series. This came out in 2019. The Cursebreaker series started with a really loose Beauty and the Beast retelling. It is about a girl named Harper from Washington, D.C., who really kind of has a horrible life. Like her mother is sick. They're dealing with some financial troubles because of her father has made some poor choices. And Harper is now playing lookout for her brother, who is doing some kind of nefarious things to get some money. And one day Harper sees a man kidnapping a girl off the streets, and she decides she needs to intervene. And when Harper steps in, she is snatched away to a fantasy kingdom where she discovers that there is a prince cursed to repeat the autumn of his 18th year over and over again until he can convince a girl to fall in love with him. Now, in the series, Harper wants nothing to do with spoiled princes or curses or any of this stuff. She just wants to get home, but the only way for her to get home is to fall in love. The series was a New York Times bestseller. This was my first New York Times bestselling book, which was truly a dream come true for me. I love that this series has connected with readers all over the world. It's been amazing. It has changed my life. And I'm so excited about A Vow So Bold and Deadly. This comes out in January. The release date is January 26th in the USA. In A Vow So Bold and Deadly, and I don't want to spoil anything from Curse for those of you who haven't read it, but by the time we get to A Vow So Bold and Deadly, there are two warring kingdoms that kind of came to light in Curse, and there is a huge battle for the throne and who is going to be the true king of Emberfall. Our girl Harper, is now living as a princess and has a lot to say about what's going on. I've got two heroines, I've got two heroes. This book is told from 4 points of view. It was so much fun to write, and I wrote the majority of it during the pandemic, and I took all of the emotion from 2020 and just poured it into this year. And I'm so proud of this book, and I really can't wait for everyone to read it. But thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Brigid. Now we'll hear from Charlie Jane Anders. Charlie Jane is the author of Victories Greater Than Death, the first book in a new young adult trilogy, along with a short story collection, Even Greater Mistakes. Her other books include The City in the Middle of the Night and All the Birds in the Sky. Her fiction and journalism have appeared in the New York Times, The Washington Post, Slate, McSweeney's, Mother Jones, The Boston Review, Tor.com, Tin House, Conjunctions, Wired Magazine, and other places. Her TED Talk, Go Ahead, Dream About the Future, got 700,000 views in its first week. With Annalee Newitz, she co-hosts the podcast Our Opinions Are Correct. Take it away, Charlie Jane. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Okay, starting over. Sorry, I was muted. Technology. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a thrill to be here and talk to all of you. I wish we were all here in person, but I love librarians so much, and I'm just so grateful for all the work you do, especially in the middle of this pandemic. I know that y'all are dealing with a really tough situation, and I'm just so grateful that you're librarians are like my absolute heroes. So speaking of heroes, when I was a little kid, all I wanted was to leave this planet behind. I wanted aliens to swoop down out of the sky and say, you belong with us. We're your real family. Come up to space where you belong. And, I still kind of want that, especially lately. But, I was kind of a weird kid growing up. I was the kid who kind of I had a severe learning disability. which I only overcame by using my imagination. And, I just spent all my time kind of like wandering around the schoolyard in my own head, kind of daydreaming my own escapist fantasies about heroes and monsters. And I've put all of that yearning into this book, Victories Greater Than Death, which you can see the cover art behind me. And, it's the story of Tina, who is just an ordinary girl on Earth, or at least that's what she thinks at first. But then she finds out, even before the book begins, that she's actually an alien who was left on Earth as a baby. She's the clone of a legendary hero. And soon it'll be time for her to go back into the stars and reclaim her destiny. And that's all she wants. She just wants to be the hero that she was meant to be and to go out there and make a difference and save people. But the time comes and the reality is not what she was expecting. Luckily, she has her best friend Rachel with her. And Rachel is like her best friend since childhood. She's a shy artist who helps Tina to stay grounded. And they also bring along some other kids from Earth who become kind of Tina's chosen family and help her to survive when she's on an alien starship where she's really not sure where she fits in. And they're on a mission to save absolutely everybody. And, over time, Victories Greater Than Death kind of turned into a meditation about what it means to have a heroic destiny and chosen one stories in general. I love those kinds of stories, like Steven Universe was mentioned earlier. I love Steven Universe so much. And, Tina's kind of torn between her human friends and these aliens who are expecting her to be this legendary hero back from the dead. And, it's a tough struggle. And it gets into the question of what kind of hero she wants to be. And, meanwhile, it was really important to me to include LGBTQ plus characters who get to help save the universe and get to be amazing heroes, including this one trans girl named Elsa who ran away from home when her parents didn't accept her. And she's had a really rough time and has a really hard time trusting people. But, she and Tina end up forming a really intense bond. And finally, also, I wanted to mention there's a scene halfway through the book where Tina takes a life for the first time, and it kind of devastates her emotionally. And that was a scene that I didn't expect to write, but it ended up becoming a really important scene in the book because I ended up kind of dealing a lot with the question of how to be a hero and have to resort to violence, the toll violence takes on you, what it costs you emotionally to take a life, which is something that I've heard a lot of teens say that they wish they saw more of in young adult fiction. So, Victories Greater Than Death is kind of a book about what all of my books are about, identity. Like, who am I? What kind of person do I want to be? And how do I use my power for good and help make the universe a better place? So excited to share with you. And thanks again for being here today. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Charlie Jane. Now that you've both had a chance to tell us a little bit about your books, Brigid, would you mind turning on your camera and unmuting yourself? And I will turn on my camera so we can all see each other's faces, and we'll get started with the panel portion of our webinar today. So let's talk about YA, Charlie Jane. This is your first foray into the YA field. How has it been different writing for teens than it is for adults?
Oh, I mean, it's been so much fun. It was a huge adjustment at first. Like I actually sat down on the floor of my apartment with a bunch of my favorite YA books spread out around me and just looked through them all to try and see how the voice kind of works in YA and how to write in a YA kind of style. But I just had so much fun with it because I felt like, the emotion is kind of turned up a little bit. The pacing is a lot faster, which ended up being something that I really enjoyed a lot. Like, and getting to have like kind of a fast-paced, seat-your-pants adventure with lots of feelings was like, that's what I've always loved as a reader. And so getting to write that was really good. Also, I feel like I didn't have to sugarcoat things quite as much in terms of like the politics and like the LGBTQ themes. Like, I felt like a lot of teen readers are just like, they're ready. They understand. They don't need you to hold their hand quite as much before you're just like, yep, these characters are queer. And also we're going to ask some really serious questions about like the use of violence and like power and the abuse of power. And I feel like with adult readers, you need to kind of hold their hand a little bit more. But with teens, they're just ready for it because they've grown up with queerness and they have, and their younger readers are really like attuned to politics and really kind of ready for these kinds of conversations. So I found it kind of liberating to write for teens. And I'm really excited to kind of get out there and talk to teens once the book is out. And anyway.
Isn't it funny that's sort of the opposite of the rhetoric you hear about younger readers, that they are the ones who need handholding, but truly it's the adults who probably need a little bit more like nudging in the right direction.
I really think that's true. Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
teens, I think that adults want to protect teens from certain topics or certain themes, but I don't think teens have a problem with it, I know when I was a teenager, I definitely was ready for stuff that a lot of adults were scared of. I don't know, I think it's like part of life.
And I feel like with reading that you really have an opportunity to explore things that might be a little bit scary in a really safe way. And as adults, we've lived through a lot of those things. So, we're like, oh, wow, this could really go poorly. Whereas teenagers are like, hey, it's fine. Let's take the motorcycle off the cliff. Why not? Let's see what happens. And books are a really safe way to kind of explore that. And I love that about YA literature. I love that everything that you said, because it's so true. It's everything I love about YA.
So Brigid, I want to turn the attention over to you now. So you're coming to the end of a hit YA series here, and you alluded to this briefly in your introduction, but I'm wondering whether A Vow So Bold and Deadly was harder or easier to write than the rest of the books in the series.
So, it was definitely harder, with the pandemic. I have 3 little boys and we live in a really tiny house. And once everything shut down, I will never forget March 13th. Once everything shut down, my husband and I, kind of had to have this reckoning moment, like, okay, so how is this going to happen? Like with virtual school and the fact that I had to finish this book. My editor, who is amazing, Mary Kate Castellani at Bloomsbury, is just a phenomenal editor. And she was getting ready to go on maternity leave. And she sent me just the most amazing email. And it was just kind of like, look, we're all in this together. Like the book will get done. We'll get it. We'll make it happen. And there were a lot of mornings where I would really kind of lock myself in the basement from 4:30 in the morning till 8 a.m. so that I could try to write before my husband had to be on the clock and before all the kids were awake. And I would just sit down there and I would scroll the news until my husband convinced me to install like an internet blocker, like stop looking at CNN, you were on deadline. And I took all of that emotion of those months and just kind of threw it into the manuscript. My editor was amazing. We did it kind of piecemeal. I would be like, okay, I've written another 3 chapters. Well, here's the next 4 chapters, whatever. And she would give me feedback and we got the book done that way. And I'm so excited for readers to read it. I know that there are really limited advanced review copies. So I'm sorry, this late date, I don't know if any more are available, but I can't wait for people to read it. I'm so proud of it. I love the end of this series so much.
Cool. So both of your books have a really vivid sense of world building. And I'd love to hear a little bit about each of your inspirations for that world building and how you each went about developing those worlds. So Charlie Jane, why don't we start with you on that one?
Sure. So obviously Victories Greater than Death was super influenced by like all the classic like Star Trek, Star Wars, Guardians of the Galaxy, all that stuff. And when and while I was writing it, I discovered Steven Universe and She-Ra and some other newer stuff while I was working on it. So there are all those influences reflected in there, but I didn't want it to feel like a clone of any of those things. I didn't want to be like, oh, that's this thing from Star Trek, or oh gosh, it's like they just took this thing out of Star Wars and just changes it slightly or whatever. So I had to really think about like how things work in my universe and how to make them kind of like how things could make sense internally with like the backstory that I came up with, which was way too complicated, like the backstory of the whole universe, which you'll see there's like so much stuff. Like there's like 1,000 years of history that keeps being referenced. Like not to the point where there's a history lesson, but people talk about things that happened a long time ago. And I wanted a dense mythos and all that kind of stuff because I feel like people really want to kind of dive into that stuff. But I thought really hard about trying to create aliens and technologies and things that I had never seen before, that were that felt unique to me. That and that ended up opening up their own problems. Like you don't want things that are all your characters. You don't want it to be like, oh well, we can just use the whiz bang and then we can get out of this situation like boom, boom, boom. I thought a lot about how to make it so that, well, we can do this thing, but it's really tricky and it requires a lot of luck and it might not work the first 5 times. And stuff like that. Like I wanted my characters to be underdogs. That was also another thing. But mostly it was just hours and hours and hours of brainstorming and trying to like not be too similar to these things that I was influenced by.
Cool. Brigid, how about you? Talk about the world building in your series.
I always feel like I really cheat at world building. So I spend a lot of time talking to teenagers about writing. And the way I build my worlds is as I'm writing, I put something really cool on the page. And if it doesn't work, I delete it later, which is like the least sexy technical writing answer ever. So I have never really been a huge plotter. I'm more of a plotter now, the longer I get into my writing career, as far as like building out everything in advance. Part of the true joy of writing for me is the discovery and figuring it out as I go along. And one of the reasons I love talking about this with teenagers is I think right now, especially, we spend so much time talking about when we're learning and when we're in school that we want to get it right the first time, right? It's, I need to learn the correct answers so that I can do it right the first time. And one of the exciting things about doing anything creative is that you can make mistakes. And there's something really liberating about leaning into that. So for me, for my world building, if I want to give a character magic, I will give them magic on the page and say, okay, is there a way that I can work this in right now? And sometimes I'll get 50 pages later and I'll be like, no, I really don't like this. And I can go back and fix it. Other times, I'll be like, wow, this is the greatest thing I have ever come upon in my entire life. Like in, A Curse So Dark and Lonely, I gave Gray a bracelet, which, ends up playing into things because the steel that it's made of plays into things in A Vow So Bold and Deadly. And it just, sometimes things just work out. And that for me is just the best part of world building. And I realize that's not like an exciting technical answer, sorry.
That's okay. It doesn't have to be exciting and technical. I'm curious about how you do it. So speaking of your writing process, you juggle a lot of points of view in your series. Can you talk a little bit about how you manage all of those different perspectives and voices?
So for A Vow So Bold and Deadly, it was 4 points of view, and that was definitely the biggest challenge. Up till Vow, all of my books had all been alternating points of view between the boy and the girl character. And when I sat down to write Vow, and I told my editor what I had in mind, she gave me the green light. She was like, sometimes when we have too many points of view, it can feel a little bit bloated. The one thing I'll say in Vow is that I did, after I just said that I was not really a plotter, this one I did have things kind of structured out. And I knew kind of my first 8 chapters were going to be, Ren and Harper, and then we're going to have Gray and Liamara, and then, we're going to switch back to Ren and Harper, back to Gray and Liamara, and then everybody will come together. So I did have this one a little more structured. And that's the only thing that kind of let me keep everything in kind of moving linearly. And the only other thing is I will say that often when I'm writing from several different points of view is that occasionally I will have to rewrite a scene from somebody else's head. It just won't work. And that's, again, like I talked about before, for me, it's just part of the discovery in the writing.
Do you do that too, Charlie Jane? Are you a plotter or a pantser? Is basically like the heart of this question, like a seat of your pantser.
I'm a little of both. I think, I always think a lot of these things are kind of a spectrum. Like you have like people at one end who are just like, I must outline to the point where like I know every single moment that happens and every single thing in advance. And they're basically writing a draft, but it's in outline form, but it gets very detailed and, whatever. And then there are people at the other extreme who are just like, I'm going to just wander in the wilderness and eventually I'm going to find the story. And, I think traditionally or in the past, I've mostly fallen on the kind of making it up as I go side a little bit more. Like definitely my adult novels, I was like, okay, I'm just going to kind of wander around and see where this goes and write a bunch of scenes of these characters doing stuff and see what the characters are doing and like see if I can get something fun out of that, like with All the Birds in the Sky and The City in the Middle of the Night. That was definitely how it worked. But YA, I've definitely been working on being a little bit more of a plotter, especially like Victories is the first book of a trilogy, and the third book, I decided I'm going to have a very, very, very detailed outline before I start writing any of it. Like at this point, the outline is incredibly detailed and lengthy and like scene by scene. And actually, I have spent some time working in a TV writer's room where, everything goes on these index cards, and you get like an index card of like, we do it like first the whole season, and then episode by episode, and then scene by scene, and then every scene is broken down, and it's like the walls are covered with index cards with like every moment in the episode, because you want to like, every episode has to like stand on its own, but also set up the next episodes and everything, and it gets very complicated. So that kind of taught me to be a little bit more of a plotter, I think, like that experience. And I just feel like with YA, maybe like, especially with a kind of adventure focused YA where it's like there's plot stuff and there's mysteries that have to be answered. Definitely in the first book, there were things where I was like, I'm going to figure this out later. I only have to explain this in the second book. And then I wrote the second book and I was like, why did I do that to myself? Why, past self, why? And I'm like, and I ended up coming up with answers to the stuff that I came up with that I had left in the first book for me to figure out later. I did come up with answers that I thought, okay, that works. I really like that. But it was definitely, it would taught me a lesson, especially if you're going to write more sequels, to not just completely like throw yourself off a cliff. And it, I don't know. So, but the third book, it's a much more structured, like every single bit is, but the thing I mentioned before, like I'm going on and on, but the thing I mentioned before about how I had that scene where Tina kills someone for the first time, and that ends up being like the linchpin of the book that really changes everything that comes after it. That was something that I had no idea was coming. I was just like, oh, she's on her heroic journey. She's doing blah, blah, blah. Oh, and then she's in a fight. And it's like, but what happens when she kills this person? And it ended up, that answer just kind of took me in this whole other direction that I didn't plan on. And I feel like the series as a whole would be much less closer to my heart, much less powerful, I think, if I hadn't stumbled onto that kind of, if I'd had a rigid outline and had not found that scene, I would not be as happy with the series as a whole now, I think.
Interesting. So Brigid, since you have been talking about how you sort of discover as you're writing, is there anything that you discovered in the process of writing Cursebreaker series that really changed the future of the series for you?
Yes. It's funny how characters can really kind of take over the story. I have two characters in Curse. One is Commander Gray, who is Prince Ren's like the only person trapped with him in the Curse. And then my main character, Harper, has a brother named Jake. And throughout the entire book, as I'm writing, I'm like, Gray and Jake are going to meet, and they are going to be immediate friends. They're going to be best friends. I cannot wait till the scene when they meet. I just can't wait to write it. Like sometimes there are scenes that I can see in my head so clearly that it's almost like a prize to get to that point so I can write it. And I was writing along and I put them in the same room together and I was like, oh no, you hate each other? Like I don't know what happened or how it happened. And they have a really complicated relationship throughout the entire series. And then also when I was writing Curse, so when I wrote Curse, I was halfway through the first draft in 2016. I can't believe this is so long ago. I was halfway through the first draft in 2016. And then the 2016 election happened. No matter where you stand on the political divide, I'm pretty sure everyone was shocked by the results of the 2016 election. And it just really made me think about, what obligations, our community leaders and world leaders have to the public and to the population and to their countries. And it really made me think about, how big I wanted the world of Emberfall to be and what kind of choices I wanted those rulers to make. And those were probably the two biggest impacts in the series, one small with characters and one big on a world level.
Interesting. So Charlie Jane, I had a question that was directed at you, but you sort of already answered it. So I'm just going to skip ahead because that was a really good segue into this next question, which is, do sci-fi and fantasy spaces offer different opportunities to explore questions than you might in a realistic novel? Brigid, you just sort of touched on that. Charlie Jane, do you want to start on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that science fiction and fantasy currently are like the only place that you can ask a lot of the questions that are like the most important questions we're facing right now, partly because we're living in such a science fictional time with like COVID and climate change. And like, this past year, not only did COVID happened, but climate change, the effects of climate change have become so much harder to deny just in the past year. Like we had nonstop wildfires for like months here in California. It's been, it's been crazy. And so there's a lot of very science fictional stuff happening in the world right now. And I think that science fiction and fantasy let us ask these big questions about like power and who has it and how we use it and how the world is organized and what it means to be a good person, all of the really important questions that we have to ask that are just really hard to write about. And I think it's very, like, this is something I've said a lot lately. I think it's very hard to write about the world of 2020 or the world of the 21st century in a realistic novel. I think it's, I keep noticing that a lot of realist novels, a lot of literary novels rather, are either post-apocalyptic, like in the future sometime, like Emily St. John Mandel, or like Station 11, or like countless other novels that have come out in the last several years, or they take place in like the 90s. They take place in like the 20th century. Like Little Fires Everywhere was one that I read a while ago where I was like, why does this take place in the 90s? Well, because the characters don't have cell phones and they don't have, Facebook, and they don't have, Snapchat, and like, and it would be a very different story if you had cell phones and Snapchat and Facebook and like, Twitter and stuff. And so you just can sidestep that by setting it in the 90s. And I think that it's so hard to write a realist novel set in 2020. It's going to be obsolete by the time it's published, but also so much of what's going on right now is just so hard to wrap our brains around. Like, it's just really hard to wrap my mind around the world we're living in currently. And I think that a kind of heightened realism or larger than life realism is the way to go. And that's, I could go on and on about that, but I really think that that's like where a lot of the biggest questions can be answered right now. And especially in YA science fiction, I think.
Brigid, how about you? What do you think sci-fi and fantasy afford as far as exploring the issues of the day?
I think what's really fascinating about sci-fi and fantasy is that you can really kind of go big or go home, and if you look at fantasy, I don't want to say look at fantasy as like an allegory for our, current events, but you really can ask some really, really hard questions about, like I was saying earlier, about world leaders, about democracy, or about, any kind of power structure in the world. And you can do it kind of like what we said about YA, you can do it in a safe way. You can really tackle a lot of tough issues in a safe way, in an accessible way, especially in YA. If you look at all the popular YA fantasy, you are talking about a lot of different, kingdoms or societies, whether it's dystopian or fantasy or anything like that. And it's very fun, and it makes it easier for teens to kind of really grapple with what's going on in the world today. And like Charlie Jane said, I have several contemporary novels. I cannot imagine writing a contemporary novel right now. I'm so happy I veered into YA, because I cannot imagine writing contemporary YA. Like, do you just give everyone masks? Like, are kids in school? What's going to happen in 2021? Like, no one knows. So yeah.
I feel like there's so much baggage, right, that comes with all contemporary questions about like our existence and what's important and our values and our power structures. And when you like sublimate all of those questions into like a fantasy world with like aliens or like a species of beings that don't look like us, you can take away those things that might be too hard to bear if you're thinking about it in reality. And you can think about just the structure or like just the values without the added pressure of like deciding how it's going to affect your day to day. And I think that's a good and valuable tool for readers in general. We are almost out of time, so I'm going to ask one last question. Imagine your book is on a library display. What books would you like to see next to your book on that display? Charlie Jane, why don't we start with you for this one?
Oh man, so many. I mean, I would be thrilled if my books were displayed next to Amy Kaufman's books, because she's one of my writing heroes, and Holly Black. If my books were to display with Holly Black, she's somebody who I've just been like on a deep dive into her work recently, and Rainbow Rowell, of course, but also some of the classics like Madeleine L'Engle, like A Wrinkle in Time, I feel like was a book that just like changed my life when I was a kid. Also, Dread Nation by Justina Ireland is another YA that I would die if my book was next to Dread Nation in a display. And also Bethany C. Morrow, I want to mention, who you saw her next book in Anthony's amazing presentation. I feel like I'm in kind of in awe of how amazing YA is right now, and how the wheel of diverse, how so many other things have made YA just so much more exciting in the last few years. And people like Mark Oshiro is another person whose books I'm like to see my next to. I feel like there's just so much exciting stuff happening, and it's just getting to be part of that is such a thrill.
Yeah. Brigid, how about you? What would you like to see on your dream library display with your book?
Wow. I mean, honestly, for me, just the fact that my books are in libraries is amazing. 12-year-old Brigid is just kind of like, but, probably one of my favorite YA authors is Sabaa Tahir. She is amazing. I love An Ember in the Ashes. I love An Ember in the Ashes so much that in my contemporary YA, call it what you want, my hero, Rob, is a huge fan of her books. No, and I love Melissa Albert. My books would probably be on a shelf near hers because she does a lot of the same kind of real world meshing with fantasy. I also love Holly Black. She is phenomenal. Tracy Dion wrote Legendborn, and that book is amazing. I would love to share some shelf space. And I should have written down a list because I don't have a longer list. But those are some of my recent favorites. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for being here and for talking about books with me. This has been a real pleasure. I've had a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This was a wonderful conversation, and thank you so much for your super thoughtful questions, Sarah. You rule.
Thank you. So tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, certificate of completion, and video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit www.booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones like the ones you see here. If you haven't already, be sure to check out Booklist Reader, where Booklist contributors post about the latest book news and reviews. Not yet a subscriber? Pair the print reading experience with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com and lock in print, online, digital, and archive access by taking advantage of this special webinar offer to get Booklist for only $75. While you're perusing Booklist online, be sure to also check out Book Links, a quarterly supplement to Booklist perfect for educators and school librarians. It is now freely available to all. To start reading, just click on the link beneath the cover image located within the left column of our homepage, and you can read all of our issues. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. And one more thank you to our sponsors, Bloomsbury and Tortine, and a special thank you to Charlie Jane Anders and Brigid Kemmerer for joining us today. This concludes today's webinar.